In July 1979, President Jimmy Carter delivered what would come to be known as the Crisis of Confidence speech, a sobering reflection on the growing disillusionment among the American people. He did not merely address the economic challenges of the times such as inflation, unemployment, and the energy crisis, but instead pointed to a deeper, more pervasive issue, a loss of faith in institutions, leadership, and the shared ideals that once formed the bedrock of the nation. Carter recognized that the American public was suffering from more than just material hardship. They were experiencing a profound moral and spiritual crisis, a growing fear that the country was drifting away from its core values of unity, hard work, and collective responsibility. He warned that if America could not rekindle its sense of purpose, it would slide further into cynicism, division, and decline. More than 4 decades later, America finds itself once again at a defining moment in its history. Though the specific challenges have evolved, the underlying sense of disillusionment that Carter spoke of has only deepened. Political divisions have hardened into seemingly irreconcilable camps, fueled by partisan media, gerrymandered districts, and a growing mistrust in the electoral process. Economic inequality has reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age, leaving millions of Americans feeling that the American dream is slipping out of reach. Social cohesion is fraying as cultural identity struggles intensify, with debates over race, immigration, gender, and history exposing deep-seated anxieties about what it means to be American. The once unquestioned belief in upward mobility, the idea that hard work and perseverance could lead to a better life, has eroded for many, particularly among younger generations who see the cost of living skyrocketing while wages stagnate. At the heart of today's crisis of confidence is a pervasive uncertainty about the future. The optimism that once defined the American spirit has given way to a sense of exhaustion and apprehension. Climate change threatens not only the environment but also the stability of industries and communities. Automation and artificial intelligence are reshaping the workforce, making entire job sectors obsolete, while concentrating wealth in the hands of a technological elite. Geopolitical tensions, particularly with China and Russia, raise questions about America's standing as a global leader. Meanwhile, the social contract that once bound Americans together, through shared investments in public education, healthcare, and infrastructure, seems to be unraveling as ideological battles stall progress on urgent issues. While Carter's speech was meant to serve as both a warning and a call to action, today's crisis presents an even more urgent challenge. Can America restore trust in its institutions and reclaim its sense of collective purpose, or is it doomed to fracture under the weight of its own internal conflicts? The answer to this question will determine not just the country's political and economic future, but also the fate of its people, especially those who have long been marginalized or left behind by the existing system. To truly understand the depths of America's modern crisis of confidence, it is essential to examine both its historical roots and its present-day manifestations. This requires looking at how economic shifts, political polarization, racial and social tensions, and cultural transformations have reshaped the national landscape. Only by addressing these fundamental issues can the nation hope to find a path forward, one that restores faith in democracy, renews economic opportunity, and fosters a more inclusive and united society. The stakes are high, and the choices made in the coming years will shape the course of American history for generations to come. Now, let's take a moment to watch President Jimmy Carter's Crisis of Confidence speech in full. Pay close attention to how he frames the challenges of his time, the solutions he proposes, and the tone he uses to address the American people. After watching, we'll return with a critical analysis, breaking down the speech's key themes, its relevance to today's issues, and whether Carter's message still holds weight in modern America.
And who draws his strength and his wisdom from you. During the past 3 years, I've spoken to you on many occasions about national concerns, the energy crisis, reorganizing the government, our nation's economy, and issues of war, and especially peace. But over those years, the subjects of the speeches, the talks, and the press conferences have become increasingly narrow, focused more and more on what the isolated world of Washington thinks is important. Gradually, you've heard more and more about what the government thinks, or what the government should be doing, and less about our nation's hopes, our dreams, and our vision of the future. 10 days ago, I had planned to speak to you again about a very important subject, energy. For the 5th time, I would have described the urgency of the problem and laid out a series of legislative recommendations to the Congress. But as I was preparing to speak, I began to ask myself the same question that I now know has been troubling many of you. Why have we not been able to get together as a nation to resolve our serious energy problem. It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. So I want to speak to you first tonight about a subject even more serious than energy or inflation. I want to talk to you right now about a fundamental threat to American democracy. I do not mean our political and civil liberties. They will endure. And I do not refer to the outward strength of America, a nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world, with unmatched economic power and military might. The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and in the loss of a unity of purpose for our nation. Our progress has been part of a living history of America, even the world. We always believed that we were part of a great movement of humanity itself called democracy, involved in the search for freedom. And that belief has always strengthened us in our purpose. But just as we are losing our confidence in the future, we are also beginning to close the door on our past. In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, and our faith in God, too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. We've learned that piling up material goods cannot fill the emptiness of lives which have no confidence or purpose. The symptoms of this crisis of the American spirit are all around us. For the first time in the history of our country, a majority of our people believe that the next 5 years will be worse than the past 5 years. 2/3 of our people do not even vote. The productivity of American workers is actually dropping. And the willingness of Americans to save for the future has fallen below that of all other people in the Western world. As you know, there is a growing disrespect for government and for churches and for schools, the news media, and other institutions. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning. These changes did not happen overnight. They've come upon us gradually over the last generation. Years that were filled with shocks and tragedy. We were sure that ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet, until the murders of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. We were taught that our armies were always invincible and our causes were always just, only to suffer the agony of Vietnam. We respected the presidency as a place of honor until the shock of Watergate. We remember when the phrase "sound as a dollar" was an expression of absolute dependability until 10 years of inflation began to shrink our dollar and our savings. We believed that our nation's resources were limitless until 1973, when we had to face a growing dependence on foreign oil. These wounds are still very deep. They have never been healed. Looking for a way out of this crisis, our people have turned to the federal government and found it isolated from the mainstream of our nation's life. Washington, D.C. has become an island. The gap between our citizens and our government has never been so wide. The people are looking for honest answers, not easy answers. Clear leadership, not false claims and evasiveness and politics as usual. What you see too often in Washington and elsewhere around the country is a system of government that seems incapable of action. You see a Congress twisted and pulled in every direction by hundreds of well-financed and powerful special interests. You see every extreme position defended to the last vote, almost to the last breath, by one unyielding group or another. You often see a balanced and a fair approach that demands sacrifice, a little sacrifice from everyone, abandoned like an orphan, without support and without friends. Often you see paralysis and stagnation and drift. You don't like it, and neither do I. What can we do? First of all, we must face the truth, and then we can change our course. We simply must have faith in each other, faith in our ability to govern ourselves, and faith in the future of this nation. Restoring that faith and that confidence to America is now the most important task we face. It is a true challenge of this generation of Americans. Our fathers and mothers were strong men and women who shaped a new society during the Great Depression, who fought world wars, and who carved out a new charter of peace for the world. We ourselves are the same Americans who just 10 years ago put a man on the moon. We are the generation that dedicated our society to the pursuit of human rights and equality. And we are the generation that will win the war on the energy problem, and in that process rebuild the unity and confidence of America. We are at a turning point in our history. There are two paths to choose. One is the path I've warned about tonight, the path that leads to fragmentation and self-interest. Down that road lies a mistaken idea of freedom, the right to grasp for ourselves some advantage over others. That path would be one of constant conflict between narrow interest, ending in chaos and immobility. It is a certain route to failure. All the traditions of our past, all the lessons of our heritage, all the promises of our future point to another path, the path of common purpose and the restoration of American values. That path leads to true freedom for our nation and ourselves. We can take the first steps down that path as we begin to solve our energy problem. Energy will be the immediate test of our ability to unite this nation, and it can also be the standard around which we rally. On the battlefield of energy, we can win for our nation a new confidence, and we can seize control again of our common destiny. In little more than 2 decades, we've gone from a position of energy independence to one in which almost half the oil we use comes from foreign countries at prices that are going through the roof. Our excessive dependence on OPEC has already taken a tremendous toll on our economy and our people. This is the direct cause of the long lines which have made millions of you spend aggravating hours waiting for gasoline. It's the cause of the increased inflation and unemployment that we now face. This intolerable dependence on foreign oil threatens our economic independence and the very security of our nation. The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we simply must face them. I will soon submit legislation to Congress calling for the creation of this nation's first solar bank, which will help us achieve the crucial goal of 20% of our energy coming from solar power by the year 2000. These efforts will cost money, a lot of money. And that is why Congress must enact the windfall profits tax without delay. It will be money well spent, unlike the billions of dollars that we ship to foreign countries to pay for foreign oil. These funds will be paid by Americans to Americans. These funds will go to fight, not to increase inflation and unemployment. I'm proposing a bold conservation program to involve every state, county, and city, and every average American in our energy battle. This effort will permit you to build conservation into your homes and your lives at a cost you can afford. I ask Congress to give me authority for mandatory conservation and for standby gasoline rationing. To further conserve energy, I'm proposing tonight an extra $10 billion over the next decade to strengthen our public transportation systems. And I'm asking you, for your good and for your nation's security, to take no unnecessary trips, to use carpools or public transportation whenever you can, to park your car one extra day per week, to obey the speed limit, and to set your thermostats to save fuel. Every act of energy conservation like this is more than just common sense. I tell you, it is an act of patriotism. Our nation must be fair to the poorest among us. So we will increase aid to needy Americans to cope with rising energy prices. We often think of conservation only in terms of sacrifice. In fact, it is the most painless and immediate way of rebuilding our nation's strength. Every gallon of oil each one of us saves is a new form of production. It gives us more freedom, more confidence, that much more control over our own lives. So the solution of our energy crisis can also help us to conquer the crisis of the spirit in our country. It can rekindle our sense of unity, our confidence in the future, and give our nation and all of us individually a new sense of purpose. I do not promise you that this struggle for freedom will be easy. I do not promise a quick way out of our nation's problems, when the truth is that the only way out is an all-out effort. What I do promise you is that I will lead our fight, and I will enforce fairness in our struggle, and I will ensure honesty. Little by little, we can and we must rebuild our confidence. We can spend until we empty our treasuries, and we may summon all the wonders of science, but we can succeed only if we tap our greatest resources: America's people, America's values, and America's confidence. In closing, let me say this. I will do my best, but I will not do it alone. Let your voice be heard. Whenever you have a chance, say something good about our country. With God's help and for the sake of our nation, it is time for us to join hands in America. Let us commit ourselves together to a rebirth of the American spirit, working together with our common faith. We cannot fail. Thank you and good night.
Political dysfunction, a system in paralysis. One of the most visible manifestations of America's crisis of confidence is its political dysfunction. Gridlock in Washington has become the status quo, as hyper-partisanship obstructs meaningful legislative progress. Major issues such as healthcare, climate policy, and social justice are no longer approached as problems, requiring collective solutions, but as battlegrounds for ideological dominance. The result is a political landscape where compromise is seen as weakness, and winning at all costs takes precedence over governance. This breakdown in political function has led to a historic erosion of trust in democratic institutions. A significant number of Americans question the legitimacy of elections, the impartiality of the judicial system, and the role of the media as an arbiter of truth. When citizens begin to lose faith in their government's ability to function, the very foundation of democracy becomes unstable. For Black and minority communities, this crisis is even more profound. Voter suppression efforts, gerrymandering, and systemic inequalities in the legal system have created a sense that democracy is failing those who need it most. The perception that government does not serve all its people equally has fueled both activism and disillusionment. As long as representation and justice remain privileges rather than rights, the divide between governance and the governed will continue to widen. Restoring faith in the system requires bold action to ensure fair elections, equitable policies, and genuine accountability for those in power. Economic uncertainty, the vanishing American dream. Economic instability is another pillar of the crisis of confidence. In the post-World War II era, America thrived on an unprecedented economic boom, reinforcing the notion that hard work would lead to upward mobility. However, for millions of Americans today, that dream feels increasingly unattainable. The modern economy is plagued by wage stagnation, the decline of manufacturing jobs, soaring housing costs, and the overwhelming burden of student debt. Traditional career paths have been disrupted by automation and globalization, leaving workers in constant uncertainty. Meanwhile, the concentration of wealth among a small elite challenges the notion of equal opportunity, as systemic barriers keep lower income and marginalized communities from accessing the same resources and privileges as the wealthy. For Black Americans and other historically disadvantaged groups, the racial wealth gap remains a persistent and deeply entrenched issue. Generations of discriminatory policies, including redlining, unequal access to credit, and job discrimination, have led to significant disparities in homeownership, savings, and income. The inability to accumulate generational wealth reinforces cycles of economic hardship. Without structural reforms, these inequalities will only grow, further eroding trust in the promise that America is a land of opportunity for all. If these systemic failures remain unaddressed, the country risks increasing social unrest and disillusionment with the very ideals that once made it a beacon of prosperity. Social fragmentation, the decline of a shared identity. While America has always been a diverse nation, its cultural divisions are becoming fault lines rather than sources of enrichment. Political ideology, race, religion, and geography are now defining how Americans perceive one another, often leading to alienation and hostility rather than unity. The erosion of civic engagement has deepened this fragmentation. Fewer people participate in community organizations, churches, and local institutions that once served as common ground. At the same time, while social media has connected individuals across vast distances, it has also created ideological echo chambers that reinforce existing biases. Misinformation spreads rapidly, and meaningful discourse is often replaced by outrage and division. For minority communities, this fragmentation presents both opportunities and challenges. While representation in media, politics, and business has increased, systemic discrimination and cultural marginalization remain deeply ingrained. The fight for racial justice continues, but so does the resistance to it. The question remains, will America embrace its diversity as a source of strength, or will it continue down a path of fear-based division and hostility? The role of leadership. The need for visionaries. A key element of Jimmy Carter's crisis of confidence speech was the idea that leadership is not just about policy, but about inspiring confidence and unity. Throughout American history, leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt, Martin Luther King Jr. and Barack Obama have restored faith in the nation's potential, guiding the country through its most challenging times. However, today's political landscape is marked by division rather than vision. Restoring confidence in America's future requires leadership that transcends partisanship, bringing together people from all walks of life to work toward a common purpose. Leaders must address the grievances of marginalized communities while uniting a fractured populace. This is not a call for passive centrism, but for bold, principled leadership that confronts injustice, inequality, and disillusionment. A true visionary leader must challenge entrenched power structures, advocate for policies that promote economic and social justice, and rekindle faith in democratic institutions. Without such leadership, America risks deeper fragmentation and a decline in its global standing. The country does not just need policymakers, it needs visionaries who can heal divisions, foster trust, and offer a compelling vision of a more equitable and prosperous future. The challenge is immense, but history has shown that strong leadership has the power to turn crises into opportunities for renewal and progress. Possible futures. Which path will America take? As the United States stands at a crossroads, the nation faces several potential futures, each shaped by its willingness to confront the crises at hand. Whether the country rises to the occasion or succumbs to division will depend on the actions of its leaders, institutions, and citizens. Best case scenario, a renewed commitment to democracy and equity. In an optimistic vision of the future, America recommits itself to its foundational ideals of democracy, equality, and justice. Meaningful reforms address economic inequality, systemic racism, and political dysfunction, restoring faith in institutions and fostering a new era of civic engagement. Legislative gridlock is eased through structural changes such as voting rights protections, redistricting reforms, and measures to curb the influence of money in politics. In this scenario, the economy adapts to technological shifts with policies that ensure economic mobility for all. Investments in education, job retraining, and social programs create new opportunities, particularly for marginalized communities. Social fragmentation is countered by a cultural shift that values diversity as a strength rather than a threat. America becomes a more just and prosperous society, not without its challenges, but with a renewed sense of national purpose. Worst-case scenario, decline, division, and democratic backsliding. On the other end of the spectrum, a more troubling future unfolds if the country remains on its current trajectory. Political polarization intensifies, democratic institutions erode further, and economic inequality continues to widen. Trust in governance collapses entirely, leading to increased social unrest and disillusionment. In this scenario, voter suppression tactics persist, making it harder for marginalized communities to participate in the democratic process. The justice system becomes increasingly politicized, undermining the rule of law. The economic divide deepens, with the ultra-wealthy consolidating power while the working class struggles to survive. Global confidence in the United States declines, as internal divisions prevent it from maintaining its leadership role on the world stage. This path does not lead to an immediate collapse of the nation, but rather to a prolonged period of instability, where the very fabric of American society continues to fray. Most likely scenario, a struggle between progress and resistance. Realistically, the future will likely be a mix of progress and setbacks. While some policies and movements will push for greater equity and reform, resistance from entrenched interests will slow meaningful change. America will continue to be a powerful but deeply conflicted nation, struggling to reconcile its ideals with its realities. Some states and communities may serve as models for progress, implementing successful policies that address economic and social disparities. Meanwhile, other regions may resist change, further entrenching divisions between progressive and conservative ideologies. Activism and civic engagement will remain strong, but so will opposition to systemic reforms. The battle for America's soul will persist, playing out in elections, courts, and cultural discourse. Whether the country ultimately moves toward a brighter future or deeper turmoil will depend on the decisions made today. Conclusion: rebuilding confidence, rebuilding America. The crisis of confidence facing the United States is not an inevitable death sentence, it is a call to action. The nation's future depends on its ability to rebuild trust in its institutions, address systemic inequalities, and foster a renewed sense of collective purpose. This will require leadership that prioritizes unity over division, policies that promote economic fairness, and a cultural shift that embraces diversity rather than fears it. For Black and minority communities, this means continuing the fight for justice and equal opportunity while demanding accountability from those in power. For the country as a whole, it means choosing between embracing progress or clinging to outdated structures of power and privilege. History has shown that America is capable of overcoming even its darkest periods. The question today is whether the country will rise to the occasion, committing itself to a more just and inclusive future, or whether it will allow the weight of its contradictions to pull it further into division and decline. The choice is clear, but the will to act remains uncertain. America must decide. Will it reaffirm its commitment to democracy and justice, or will it continue down a path of fragmentation and distrust? The answer to this question will shape the next chapter of American history. Consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing to keep this conversation alive and ensure more people engage with these critical issues. Change begins when people refuse to accept dysfunction as the status quo and instead work toward a future where justice, equality, and opportunity are not just ideals but realities for all.